And now we're talking about my favorite card from this entire reveal thing that they did on Friday. I think this card is very interesting and amazing. This is also the only card that I've already read because people were talking about it at the regional yesterday, and so I've already talked to some people about this one. Pot of Sloth, or I've also seen it somewhere as Pot of Procrastination. I guess I don't know what the name in the TCG is going to end up being. A new pot card in Chaos Origin, which often tends to be pretty powerful generic staples. So let's see what this one's got. Normal spell card, you cannot activate Pot of Sloth for the rest of this turn after this card resolves. Also, draw cards equal to the number of cards your opponent controls. Then, if you drew 2 or more, place the same number -1 from your hand on the bottom of the deck in any order. Quite frankly, I am amazed by the design on this card, and I think this card is with the direction that Yu-Gi-Oh is headed at the moment. I think this is going to be one of the best side deck cards for a long time in Yu-Gi-Oh. And I'll elaborate more on that in a bit, but there's a few interesting things about this card. Now, the first and obvious thing is that it's basically only useful going second, which I think is interesting in some way. I mean, I think that's good because I like cards that are good going second. I mean, I've been saying that a ton in recent card discussions or discussions in general. I like it in modern Yu-Gi-Oh! Like, going first is so good that cards that benefit the player going second are nice. However, I will say that I don't love when the cards are only good in the side deck, basically, because they are completely unusable going first. I mean, this card, I could see this card making its way into some main decks, similar to how the Charmies are making its way into some main decks. I just don't know if the risk of running this card in your main deck is worth the downside, because like it's not as game winning as a Mul Charmy resolving when you're going second. But it depends on the deck you're playing, I suppose. But even if this card only ends up being like a side deck staple, I think it's okay. But here's the thing, right? In a game of Yu-Gi-Oh! These days, unless your opponent bricks and passes on 0 cards, this card is pretty much guaranteed to draw you very minimum 3, 4, 5 cards, but more in the realm of 6 or 7 or 8 cards. Depends on if your opponent makes a half board or a full combo and what deck they're playing, but very realistically, what this card essentially reads is you can choose your hand when you're going second. This card essentially reads, pick your hand and see if you can beat the board, right? Which, quite frankly, one of the main downsides of board breaker strategies in modern Yu-Gi-Oh! Is that you let your opponent make the full board, and then your hand needs to be perfect to win, basically, right? Your hand needs to be perfect to win, and if you end up drawing just like slightly suboptimal hands where like maybe one of your board breakers is a duplicate, or you're missing a specific card, or you just don't have enough engine pieces or whatever, like basically a lot of decks that play board breakers these days can win going second, right? Like the Yu-Gi-Oh boards they're not actually unbreakable. They are just not realistically consistently breakable because the hands that you need to break them are just way too specific, right? For a lot of combo decks, right? Like for example, a Vanquish Soul K9 board, right? A Vanquish Soul K9 board is beatable if you have the perfect cards, but realistically, it wins like 95% of the time because you're not always going to have the perfect cards, right? Because as soon as you have like only one starter or just like not quite enough board breakers or not the right board breakers or whatever, you're not going to win. This card, on the other hand, essentially using Vanquish Soul K9 as an example, if you're playing a board breaker deck and you activate this card against Vanquish Soul K9, I'm pretty sure all of a sudden you are overwhelmingly the favorite to win the game because you can choose your hand. Like the friggin' Vanquish Soul K9 board is gonna have like 10 cards on it. It's 10. You're gonna draw 10 cards, yeah, you have to put 9 cards back, but you basically choose your hand out of like the first 15 cards in your deck. Which, depending on what kind of deck you play, you're gonna be able to break that board, right? And this card, like, it's interesting because I feel like this card moves in a direction that not a lot of Yu-Gi-Oh decks are moving right now. I mean, like, or rather, it's a direction that Yu-Gi-Oh should be moving in the future. Is like this whole, like, this card is bad in hand trap decks, right? Because then you're not gonna draw anything useful with it. You're just gonna draw engine, which is good maybe, but most of the time, if you're just drawing like hand traps with it, it's not gonna work. This card is clearly meant to be played in a deck that has cards like, I don't know, Forbidden Droplet, Super Poly, or Dark Ruler, or whatever, right? It's more so meant to be like a board breaker, strong engine situation where you wanna have this card. And quite frankly, I think that sort of strategy is more fun than when you just try to play the hand trap mini game with your opponent. And so I'm happy that that sort of playstyle is getting a card like this. I will say, I feel like they kind of have to make a decision with card design at some point, because there's definitely going to be games where, quite frankly, if you're playing a deck that goes, like, let's say you're going first and you get hit with a Molcharmi, and then you make a half board of like 3 to 4 cards, and then your opponent activates this, there's basically a guarantee that your opponent is going to win that game, because you made a half board, your opponent drew some cards, and then they basically get to pick their hand as well. So they're gonna have like the perfect 7 cards to play into your half board or something like that. That's going to be rough. So I feel like at this point, they're kind of like, I don't know, how do I put this? What I'm trying to say is they've kind of like tried to make everything, I mean, not everything, but they've tried a bunch of different approaches for the player going second to have a better chance at winning, and none of them have quite worked out on its own, right? Like they tried hand traps, and that obviously hasn't worked. And when I say hand traps, I mean the negation ones, right? Like they've tried giving us cards like Imperm, Ash, Dominus cards, and so on and so forth, and that obviously wasn't enough to help the player going second, because they kept making more and more powerful like combo decks. Then eventually they moved away from the negation hand traps. I mean, they haven't moved away from it, but they also tried to make more impactful like hand traps like Nibiru, or lingering ones like the Charmies, to stop people from making the big boards without playing the negation minigame. So that's been a thing. And now also Fedralis Harmonia also kind of falls into that category. But then they've also added turn 0 plays into the mix. And now they are also adding more and more like crazy ways to make breaking boards more consistent. And it's a little weird because the underlying problem is never actually addressed, right? Because the underlying problem under all of this is that going first is inherently too strong in Yu-Gi-Oh, right? That is a fact. If you go first and your opponent has none of these cards, no Charmies, no hand traps, no crazy board breakers, you win the game 90+% of the time, maybe even more than that, unless you brick pretty much. It's at this point, it's basically the consistency of your deck, right? If your opponent has no hand traps and no board breakers, the consistency of your deck is your win rate, pretty much, in modern Yu-Gi-Oh, right? Like if your deck is 95% consistent, you win 95% of the time if your opponent has no going second cards, right? Which I feel like that's the thing that they need to be fixing. And all those other things are basically band-aid fixes, right? Like negation hand traps are band-aid fixes, Charmies are band-aid fixes, turn 0 plays are band-aid fixes, board breakers are band-aid fixes, and the card that draws board breakers is also a band-aid fix. Within the realm of band-aid fixes, there are some that are more fun than others, in my opinion. You know, so, like, for example, my least favorite ones these days are the negation hand traps. I find that is my least favorite type of gameplay in modern Yu-Gi-Oh, is when you like play the mini game with your opponent and you just negate starters and hope they pass on nothing. That is personally my least favorite way to approach going second is like, oh, I'm gonna imperm that normal summon and hope it's enough, or I'm gonna ash the first card you activate and hope you can't play. I don't find that interesting. But in a lot of cases recently, it's just been the most realistic way of approaching it, because those cards also happen to be really strong going first, right? Like a lot of the board breakers or charmies are all bad going first. So for people to have useful cards in their deck going first, a lot of them are choosing cards like, you know, Ash Blossom, which is basically both. It's good going first and also okay going second. But here's the thing, as someone who's, so basically I've not been a fan of the hand traps for going second, as a solution to going first being too strong. I was more on the side of the Mold Charmies. However, I do think the Mold Charmies, if you just look at how it's been going over the last couple of years, right? Like the Mold Charmies came out and they didn't stop people from playing combo decks, right? Like they help you win going second sometimes. And as someone who likes to play mid-range decks, whenever I'm going second against a combo deck, I am happy that the Charmies exist in that moment. But in the grand scheme of things, I would still prefer if they got rid of the auto wins going first and the Charmies weren't like necessary, right? But I also do recognize that if the Charmies didn't work and they keep making other cards to help going second, that eventually like a Charmy resolving in a deck with turn 0 plays and Pot of Procrastination and board breakers, if the Charmy resolves, you're just dead basically, right? Because in order to beat someone who draws a 5 mana, or in order to beat someone who draws a Holisu, or in order to beat someone who has Pot of Procrastination in their hand, you do need to make a board. If you don't make a board and your opponent has those cards, you lose the game on the spot, right? So it's tough. And ultimately, I think the biggest challenge is to balance going first without the need for non-engine, because honestly at this point you just kind of have to admit that all of the things that they've tried to balance going second in modern Yu-Gi-Oh haven't really worked out. You know, no one is actually stopping, or no one has stopped playing these decks, you know, like it's all still happening, whether Droll is around, or Mold Charmies are around, or board breakers are around, or hand traps are around. Nothing has really changed. Like everyone plays the most powerful decks anyways. So at some point you gotta start like hitting the engine, I think. Now, still, let's circle back, because this is a topic that I could ramble on for a long time. Let's talk about Pot of Procrastination in this whole situation that we're in right now. I think this card is interesting for the time being, because it's going to give people ways to actually win going second against boards that don't have negation, right? Like, of course, this card is going to get ashed when your opponent has ashed. This card is going to get negated when your opponent has a negate most of the time, because everyone knows if this card resolves, your hand is going to be cracked afterwards. So like, as long as negation is involved, this card is whatever, you know. Like if your opponent goes first and has a board and has ash, this card is not going to help you. If your opponent goes first and has 2 or 3 negations, then this card is not going to help you. But in all of the games where no negates are involved, then this card is going to make it very interesting going second. It's not an auto win all the time, because it doesn't do anything to your opponent's board. It just makes it so that you can fix your hand to try and play into the board, which in my opinion is going to create some very interesting games, because some of the most interesting games in modern Yu-Gi-Oh is when the player going first doesn't auto win but does play the game. Like they don't get just negated, or they don't break, but they do make a board that's beatable, and then the player going second has a good hand and plays into it, right? Those are interesting Yu-Gi-Oh games nowadays, in my opinion. Some of the most interesting ones are when a board happens and then the game is playable for the player going second. And this is exactly the type of game that this card promotes, right? This is exactly the type of game that this card promotes, is when your opponent's board is beatable and you have a chance and you have a deck that can play well going second. Like, this card is going to make the game playable for you basically all the time, because there's like no deck out there that isn't going to at least put up a good fight going second after drawing like 4 or 5 cards off of Pot of Procrastination, right? Which I think is cool. It should just randomly return the same amount of cards -1. Now then it would just suck. Is this good in Sky Striker? Yes, absolutely. Yeah. This is just a replacement for Pot of Prosperity. Pot of Prosperity is weird because Pot of Prosperity was inherently stronger going first than second, which, once again, we're just circling back to this entire discussion all the time, right? But like, Pot of Prosperity was stronger going first than going second. Even though, yeah, in theory, Prosperity could dig for like outs going second, but like, it just, like, the restrictions that Pot of Prosperity puts on you are harsher for the player going second because of the no like half damage, and like no drawing also mattered when you were breaking boards, because like talents and stuff like that didn't work after, or like random other things, like you would have like a card that could draw you a card, but you couldn't do it because you're trying to break a board. And Pot of Prosperity going first was just like almost no drawback because the half damage didn't matter, and you had much better, like, you could just look at your hand and see which kind of extra cards you didn't need, and then you'd like, okay, do I need starter, do I need extender, do I need like floodgate, whatever. So I don't know, I'm a fan of this card's individual design. I think in the greater scheme of things, I don't think it solves anything for modern Yu-Gi-Oh, but I do think this card is going to be very strong when it comes out, and I think it's going to facilitate some other strategies in modern Yu-Gi-Oh, because right now there aren't that many board breaker strategies out there. There really aren't. I mean, at the moment, most decks are just doing the, at least from my perspective, I think most decks at the moment are just doing like Ash, Uwa, Droll, maybe Imperm. That's like in 99% of decks, that's the approach for going second. Is like, you just like throw a Charmy, hope to God your opponent doesn't have Ash Blossom, hope to God they only make a half board, and then you try to win that. And if they go, basically everyone at the moment accepts that if a deck goes full combo, they just lose the game, right? Which this card could fix. Like, you could actually beat someone who makes a full board if this card resolves in a board breaker deck. The question is this better than Purulia because it's a direct competition? I don't think it's a direct competition, honestly. I really don't think so. I think a deck that would play this card might also just play Purulia as well, but I think this does have a lot of benefit over Purulia. In certain, I mean, Purulia is more, especially against some of the heavy combo decks, Purulia isn't even that good. Unless it's like Radiant type. I mean, it's not even combo deck, but yeah, you know what I mean. Because of the slots in the side deck, I mean. It's hard to say because these cards go into different decks, I feel like. They can go into the same deck, of course, but I think this card just goes into maybe even an approach that doesn't even exist at the moment. The main problem of this card is that it can be negated. Yeah. Realistically, there's two main problems for this. Like, or the major problem for this card, and the major thing why in the current environment this card opens up a new approach of Yu-Gi-Oh decks, which is board breaker decks in theory are back with this card. The problem is that there's one particular play pattern that I also experienced with Sky Striker at YCS Dortmund pretty much, which was, it was a good deck for me, it worked, and it would have played this card for sure. But there's one problem with decks like this, is that when you're playing a board breaker deck in modern Yu-Gi-Oh, very, very often you will look at your hand, and I know you guys know what I'm about to say, but I'll say it anyways. You play a board breaker deck in modern Yu-Gi-Oh, you look at your hand, you look at what your opponent is doing, and very, very often, if you're playing a good board breaker deck, you're gonna think to yourself, oh, this is beatable if my opponent doesn't have Droll or Ash Blossom. And this card is not going to change that, because with this card, you're going to think the exact same thing. you're gonna go second. You're gonna watch your opponent combo. You're gonna know the matchup. You've built your deck to beat those matchups, so you know what to do, and you know it's winnable. Unless, of course, you activate this card, you shape your hand, and then they roll you, or you activate this card and it just gets ashed. So yeah. This is the ash bait for the already perfect hand. I mean, yeah, sometimes you're going to activate this and it's exactly what you need because it baits the Ash Blossom. But still, in order to beat a full combo plus Ash, even with this card in the mix, your hand is just on average not going to be good enough. One cool thing about the wording on this card, which I think is something that they should do more often, is that this card says you can't activate another one for the rest of this turn after it resolves, which means that if it gets negated, you can use another one. I think that in general is something that I'm a big fan of in modern Yu-Gi-Oh! I think they should do this more often because one of the biggest... I think drawing non-engine cards that are once per turn is so frustrating when you draw multiple. It's such a random, piece of variance in the game where you just randomly have oh, I have 2 copies of this card. I can only use one, so I'm playing one card down, basically. It's not true. It resolves negated if the effect is negated. Am I being dumb? Well, it's part of the effect. So if the effect is negated, this does not apply. It's like Illusion Gate in that way, right? I mean, Illusion Gate is worded slightly differently, but Illusion Gate also you can activate another one if the first one doesn't resolve successfully, right? But yeah. Anyways, I think we've kind of derailed into a completely different discussion, but I think this card really it showcases a lot of things that are going wrong in modern Yu-Gi-Oh! At the same time, it itself I think is a very interesting card, and I do like the design of it. I just don't know if it's going to be enough to move away from this going first problem that Yu-Gi-Oh! Has at the moment. Because ultimately, I think the only way to actually get away from that is to make decks less auto-win when they go first, inherently. And nothing else has worked in the past, quite frankly. Nothing else has worked in the past. Not the hand traps, not the charmies, not the board breakers, and also this one that lets you pick the perfect hand. I think is close to being a solution for board breaker decks, but I'm not sure if it's going to be good enough. Is board breaker gameplay actually interesting though? I mean, I guess that's subjective, but it depends, right? Yeah, cards like Lightning Storm, Evenly, Dark Ruler are not that interesting, but for the most part in modern Yu-Gi-Oh, I think end boards are very layered. So there's no single board breaker that auto wins a game for you in most modern Yu-Gi-Oh matchups, right? Even the cards I just mentioned, like Dark Ruler, are not really going to a deck doesn't die to one Dark Ruler anymore, right? For the most part, it's always a combination of engine cards and board breakers, and you're trying to sequence them perfectly to draw out the interruptions and so on. I think it's interesting. Yeah, I like it.